Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be talking about the Betterpress again because it is a hot topic, and we are going to be testing out several different types of paper with the Betterpress. The first paper I want to tell you about is one that was actually recommended by another YouTuber. Her handle is LV Handcrafted, so be sure to check her out. She's got some great stuff. And she is the one who found this paper that for me I find is very comparable to the Betterpress cardstock. And it is 110 pounds, and it's already cut down to A2 sizes, and they do have like different sizes, A7 and other sizes. Um, but the thing I love about this is how inexpensive it is for the quality that it is. So this paper ends up being about 12 cents per sheet because there's 200 pieces in the package, and the package is $25 versus the Betterpress paper, which is 25 in a package, and it was like $12.95 for those 25 pieces of paper. LV Handcrafted tested these two against each other, and she had some great results. So I want to see for myself, is that actually as good as it's chalked up to be? The other papers I wanted to try out were some handcrafted papers. So if you've ever used handcrafted papers like this, you know that there is a lot of variation in the texture. It's kind of bumpy. It's, like somewhat like watercolor paper, but even more so. So it's very difficult to work with if you are going to be stamping on it because the stamping ends up very uneven. But I've always thought this is such beautiful paper. It adds such an amazing texture to a card. So I wanted to give it a try and see how it does in the Betterpress system. The next paper I wanted to try was also a handcrafted version, and this one has on the website, you can go and see there's lots of different flowers, different colors, different types of leaves and things that are embedded into the paper. And it's a really, really beautiful paper, but again, it's really difficult to do any stamping on it because of the variations in the texture, where the flowers and the leaves are. It's a lot thicker, it's bumpier. You would not get a good impression with stamping, but I was very curious to see how would it do in the Betterpress. The next one I'm going to test is the Crane's Lettra paper. It comes in this really big package, nothing fancy, but just upon feeling the paper, you can tell that it's a high quality paper. It feels very comparable to the Betterpress paper. Here I am pulling out the Betterpress paper to put it right next to it. The Betterpress paper is the lighter colored paper, the whiter one, and the Lettra Crane paper is the more cream colored one. But the thickness is very much the same, the texture is very much the same, the weight is very much the same. In fact, I figured they're so similar that I would not be able to tell them apart, so I went ahead and I marked the Betterpress paper with just a little dot on the back so that way I'd be able to know for certain it's that piece of paper. The handmade flowered paper is kind of irregular sizing because it does come from overseas, and the actual thickness does vary because it's handcrafted paper. So some of the sheets feel a little thicker than others, but they're both quite substantial but flexible. They almost feel a bit more like fabric in some ways, but you can see some of the pieces of paper are thinner than others. That one is a lot thinner. So I decided I was going to test a thinner piece of paper and a thicker piece of paper as I do this testing process. There is a front and a back side to these papers. You can see on one side you have the images of the flowers and the petals and all of that much more visible than on the other side. Here are the other handmade papers. They came in a variety of colors, and they are also an irregular size because again they come from overseas, so it's not a consistent sizing. And these also feel very thick. They have kind of almost more of a fabric weight to them. They did come a little bit bent. I was a little disappointed by that, but it's not a huge deal. But I cut those papers all down to size, and for the flowered paper you can see I have two different stacks there. One is for the thinner paper and one is for the slightly thicker paper. Just wanted to see if there was any difference. I'm going to be testing these papers with this plate from Scrapbooking Made Simple. It's an exclusive plate to them. It was part of a bundle. And what I really like about this is how fine and detailed the frame is. This is, in my opinion, the strength of the Betterpress, is being able to get those super, super fine details. And so I was really curious to see how those details would show up on this textured, wavy paper, this handmade paper. knowing that if I were to try to stamp on these papers, the stamping would not come out well. So I was very curious to see, is this going to come out or is this going to have some issues with it? I'm just stamping these up with the regular Betterpress ink, and that came with the system. And just putting this down, and you'll notice the tape is on the corners and not the back. I'm also using the purple tape because this paper is very delicate and I've had issues with the yellow tape that came with the system just ripping the papers. So here you go, let's take a look at this. The image came out quite nice, I think. There's a lot of detail on that plate. One of the things that it did, though, is there are a couple spots where the pressure from the press actually caused the leaves or the petals to come out of the paper. So on that spot, the image wasn't really pressed in. The other thing is, because of the texture of the paper, you don't get quite that letterpress feel, that like debossed feel that you get with the other papers. Now I'm testing out the orange handcrafted paper, and as you'll see when I pull it back up, that the impression is also really quite lovely. It's very, very detailed. You can see all that intricacy there. But again, it doesn't actually deboss the paper. It basically stamps onto the paper. It comes out very pretty, but you don't get that tactile, debossed feel that you get using the actual letterpress paper. You can see the level of detail here. It really is very delicate, and it doesn't go through the back of the paper. The paper stands up quite nicely to the Betterpress system. It is a little disappointing that you don't have that feel that you get with the letterpress system. You can't quite tell that it's, special, that it's anything other than stamping, unless you're in the know, unless you know that like stamping would not give you this crisp, clean image with so much fine detail. Now I'm going to go ahead and try the thicker piece of the flowered paper to see how that does, if that makes any difference in the impression. And as you see, I'm going to go ahead and compare the two. And this one did not have any of the same issues with the petals and stuff coming up. But putting them next to each other, you can see the thinner one is slightly less dark, just a titch. But overall, I think they both came out very nicely with a lot of detail. Now we're going to go ahead and try and compare the Betterpress paper with the crane paper, and that is the Betterpress paper because it has the little dot on the top. And I expect this to come out nicely, especially because I'm putting the tape on the corners, even though it will prevent some of that impressed image from showing up. But I learned my lesson about not putting the tape on the back of the paper. And it does. It comes out really beautifully, and it's got a really nice debossed impression. All of those fine details come through. I do think they come through finer than on the hand crafted paper, but that's to be expected with the difference in texture. So this is very smooth paper, and I think the result is just stunning. Now I'm going to try the cranes paper and just speeding through the trial run here. And you can see, to me, it looks very comparable to the Betterpress. You have that same nicely textured debossed finish. It has the same level of intricacy in the image. And putting the two of them side by side, I think you'd be really hard pressed to tell which is the paper that's like 50 cents a sheet and which one is 12 cents a sheet. Like, without that dot on the back, I really would not be able to tell the difference between the two. Which is really exciting and great news, because being able to make mistakes with the paper and not feel like, oh my gosh, I just wasted, a couple of dollars just doing some trial runs, versus, I wasted 12 cents doing a couple of trial runs, allows a lot more freedom in playing around with the system. This next paper I'm going to use is one that I had in my stash, so I don't have the name or brand or anything like that for it, but it actually came in like a Hero Arts kit from like 4 or 5 years ago, something crazy like that. And I never found a use for it because of that textured paper. And I think it's supposed to be watercolor paper, but I'm not much of a watercolorist. So I decided to try it with this just to see how it came out with this like really heavy texture. And again, the image came out fantastic. There just was no debossed feeling, but that's okay. But the image itself came out really, really nicely. And now it's something that I actually could watercolor. And have it look really nice and find some use for that paper. Now this paper was quite thick, practically twice the thickness of the Betterpress paper actually. So I did remove a shim in order to have that impression come out as nice as it did. The only texture you could feel is the texture of the paper and not an actual debossed texture, but that's okay. I think it still came out really nice. I decided to test the papers with this other plate that I had. This butterfly plate I really liked, and I thought that it would go really well with the flowered paper, and it was one of the reasons that I actually bought that paper to test out. The impression I think came out quite nice. It has the same issue that I mentioned in the other portion of the video, that it is basically just like a stamped image on that paper. It's not raised, it's not debossed. I'm going ahead and doing the same thing with the other handmade paper. And again, it comes out really nice. It comes out more like a stamped image than a debossed image, but I think the overall impression is really nice, and the fact that you can get such fine lines and clear detail on that handmade paper is something that you would not be able to do with regular stamping. I went ahead and also did it with the Betterpress paper. Again, I marked it because I knew I wouldn't be able to tell it from the crane paper. And it has that lovely debossed feel to it. So that is the difference between the hand-made paper and that 100% cotton, kind of more traditionally made paper, is just that feel. But between the two papers, the Betterpress and the crane, like if you were to blindfold me and just tell me to like touch them, I really would not be able to tell the difference between them. And I think the experiment came out pretty well. It's kind of just a matter of taste, whether or not you want to have that debossed feel and whether that's more important to you, or whether having kind of that texture to the paper itself is more important. Overall, I'm really glad with how these came out. I think they came out really nicely, especially compared to the previous video I did, which if you saw on the Betterpress and the problems that I was having with it, and I was able to figure out what was going wrong. So I think these came out really nicely. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go over the cards that I made with some of these papers. I will do that in another video. But I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope especially the money aspect with the crane paper and knowing, at least for me, I could not tell a difference between the crane paper and the Betterpress paper. So that's a huge savings, 12 cents a page versus I think it was like almost 50 cents a page. Yeah, so if you want to save some money, I would say go ahead and do it. Last time I checked, the paper was still available, but it was kind of going in and out of stock. I think probably other people saw LV Handcrafted's video on the same paper and also jumped on that bandwagon, which makes a lot of sense. But check me out for the card making video for these other cards that I'm making. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you during our next adventures. If this was helpful to you, please like, subscribe, share. It's really helpful to me and helps keep me going and encouraged to keep on making these videos for you. Thanks.